so much more fun and unique than I thought.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah.
If we can ask folks to kind of move in, that would be super helpful. I don't want to like throw you guys off or anything, but if we can.
Are you from here?
Move into the center. You guys are mic'd.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
We're going to get started. So, first of all, I have had the opportunity to talk to both of you ahead of time as we got prepared for the session. And one of the things that struck me is just how different your setup is. Can you talk to me a bit about basically, first of all, your background and how you came into your roles, and then a little bit about like what your operation looks like? Maybe Elisabeth, do you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisabeth. I'm the editorial director of email at the New York Times. My shtick is that when I was a kid, I wasn't really like, oh, I'll only make it if I can become the email editor at the New York Times. But I've been doing it for almost 2 years. It's been such an interesting and being at this part of journalism where we're really understanding how powerful email is has been just extraordinarily fun. I feel very lucky. And to tell you about where the Times was, we had more than 40 newsletters when I started in November 2016. There had been no one in this editorial strategic role before I came along. I had been in breaking news at the Times and before that at the Globe for more than 10 years. And I essentially just wanted to change, and I went to the masthead, and they said, go figure out this email thing, and if you want to change in 3 months or 6 months, we'll bring you back. And now it's been nearly 18 months, and there's still so much work for us to do. A big thing for us is figuring out how to maintain a robust growth without it becoming so sprawling as it was when I first came into the job. We now have more than 55 newsletters, but we're taking a much more strategic approach to launching and also sunsetting newsletters to make sure that they actually work with not only our greater editorial plan, but also our greater corporate plan.
And Scott? Introduce yourself and talk about your background and sort of what your operation looks like.
Sure. I come from editorial as well, an editorial background. I was a reporter and an editor, but I moved to the business side probably 3, 4, 5 years ago. I've been doing a lot of different things, and I moved to the subscription revenue group just over a year ago, and our newsletters were starting to take off and show signs that they could really help the subscription side of the business. But they were kind of messy, and there wasn't really a strategy. So my boss said, focus 100% on newsletters. And I've been gradually getting the pieces in place, sort of the pillars in place, to really get them firing on all cylinders.
And I'll just quickly introduce myself. I told these guys on the phone that I'm going to try to stay out of the way of this conversation, and then they asked me to participate a little bit. So I'm managing editor of audience at the Philly Inquirer. Newsletters landed on my lap by accident. Like literally, nobody else wanted to deal with them. So we're in the middle right now of historically it had been staffed, and everybody was laid off, and it was automated, and then it was just off in the corner, and I asked about it, which is probably what made it land on my team. And so we're right in the middle of examining what we're doing, developing strategy. We've developed like a morning flagship product, the Inquirer morning newsletter, and now we're taking a look at the rest of us. So that's what qualifies me here, but I'm looking forward to learning a lot from my colleagues. So I guess, about this session, I just want to lay out a couple of things. We're going to talk for probably about 20 or 25 minutes. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and then we really want to open it up to the audience because I have a feeling there's a bunch of you here who either have valuable experience to share or questions, so that's important. We're also going to be respectful for 2 of our guests to stay away from proprietary numbers. So sometimes they're going to speak in broad terms, and obviously we all know what that's like and why we have to do so. So I just wanted to make that clear. I guess to start off with, can you share with me in your operation, and you started to talk a bit about it, what your staffing looks like, who your internal partners are, and how you kind of run things. Because I really love, right now, especially as I'm digging in, I like to kind of learn from people and understand how they're running it to know what the heck I'm supposed to do.
Sure. I think, number one, you can't really look at this as an editorial product and then you hand it over to, say, product and audience and tech. You have to consider everything right now. So if you're a writer, you can't write 400 words and hand it off to someone. You actually have to care about deliverability. You have to care about whether or not the audience is opening it and why. So that has been an extraordinarily fun aspect of this job, is working with our product, our design, our tech, and then our audience people. We are hiring like mad across the board at the company. We understand that newsletters can be a very important thing for us and our digital subscription growth. So we're hiring in editorial, we're hiring in design, we're hiring in product. Any developers that want to work for the New York Times, who want to focus on email, come talk to me. What's been really nice is this collaboration is pretty much one of the first. We had people siloed in different areas, and now we're realizing everybody really needs to work together on this, having this common goal.
And Scott?
Yeah, well, we don't quite have as big an operation as you, as you guys. So I work in it's called the CEM group, the Customer Experience Management. They're really email marketing, database marketing, and our website marketing, both internal and external. And it's a pretty small group. And then I travel across the company into the different areas to make newsletters work, I guess. So there isn't really an editorial point person. It's really some people do different newsletters or writing or curating different newsletters, and I still sit on the news desk once in a while to fill in for vacations. So I still I'm involved with editorial. I write the tickets to do the development, and I work with the developers and the UX and the design people on the newsletters. The other pillar is the analytics and the data, and so that's a really big piece of it. Is our newsletter data was stranded in its own database, and so that's the big piece in the next few months, is getting that newsletter data into all our other customer analytics, so you can get that holistic view of the newsletter user. What are they doing on site and in your apps? And then I guess our group does a lot of marketing itself, the CEM group. But that's the other big piece, is working with our people in marketing to get them into the right places internally and externally so people can sign up for them.
The title of this session is Converting Subscribers with Newsletters. And I think all three of us are in the subscription business, so we know that that's important. But I think personally, my viewpoint is it's only one piece of the puzzle. It's only one reason it's one of many reasons to run a newsletter program. Can you share with me sort of some of your thoughts? And I want to start with Scott, because you you have some very specific views on this, and I'd love you to share it with the room.
Well, I think of the newsletter as just it's a communication channel, or it's a medium. It's just a conduit to deliver content. And so people won't pay. Well, they may pay for a standalone newsletter that is very specific in the content, but people aren't going to come to the Globe and Mail to pay for our newsletters. They're paying for the content within the newsletters, or a way to get the content that they want in the newsletters. So the newsletter isn't the thing that leads to subscription and conversion. The newsletter helps people be engaged, and it's engagement which leads to subscription and conversion and retention. So I hope that makes sense. But a newsletter is a tool for engagement, to deepen engagement. It just makes it easier for people to find the content that they want.
Are you getting, one of the things after we launched our daily product that's been doing well, with some focused attention, and now some folks on my exec team are like, that's it, newsletters, 100 newsletters. The newsletters are the silver bullet. We need more newsletters, right? And I'm having to balance that a bit. And then you've also got journalists who I love, I adore, but like, give them give me a newsletter. I'm not getting on the front page, and now I want a newsletter. Like, how do you balance all of that? Or are you getting that kind of pressure?
I'm getting that all the time. First off, they're like a child. You got to take care of them. So that's what I talk to these journalists all the time. It's like, oh, yeah, I really, I miss blogging. I really want my own newsletter. It's like, then you have to really talk to them. Do you really want to do this? Who is your support staff? Because it's not just you. Everyone should sign up for this Philly local newsletter. It's an extraordinarily good product that is targeting a local audience. And my secret sauce with the secret ingredients is you first have to know your audience. So if you know razor sharp who your audience is going to be, and with this, it's local Philadelphians. So same with us for Game of Thrones pop-up newsletter we did last summer. It is like rabid, frantic fans of that HBO show.
It was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. And and the other things that made that newsletter and probably the Philly newsletter a success is that you have to have a conversational tone from an expert, and they're offering invaluable information. So you've got that trust. You're offering them something they can't get anywhere else. And then finally, you need to refine and make sure that you are hearing what the readers want, both looking at data and talking to them, and having a design that's not horrible and looking like it's from 2002. So those are the things that I feel that you really need to have, and I go back to the audience, or I go back to these journalists who want their own newsletter, and I say, have you really thought about this? And we have a whole pitch document saying, have you really thought about this? And we lose about half of the inquiries because they hadn't really thought about that, and they also hadn't thought about how much work they're going to be. But those folks who do answer those questions and who are passionate about it, we've seen some incredible success, like Game of Thrones, and we just launched a Good News newsletter. Again, but following those like little checkboxes. And
yeah, I was going to say, I think you really need to be clear about the purpose of the newsletter and what's going to be in it. So the Game of Thrones one would take a lot of resources. And there's other ones where you really are, you're just putting headlines into a package that people are going to want to consume and skim and dive into the story. Those ones are, I would never fully automate a newsletter, but those ones are easier to get off the ground because you can automate 80 or 90% of it and push it out. And the purpose of those ones is to drive people into the meter. This one is that you want them to dive into the newsletter and stay engaged, and the newsletter is really
and kind of understanding the different kinds of newsletters and then figuring out the applicable metrics. So you have what we call, just a laundry list of links. So you want those people to go back to your site, and so measure success on that note. Or we have these standalone experiences like The Interpreter, or which is foreign policy, or Game of Thrones, where I've just read it, and boy, I can click delete, and that feels so good. And then in between, you've got all these different hybrids. So just figuring out what exactly your newsletter, your goal is, and then measuring it is going to save a lot of headache down the road when you're saying, why isn't anyone doing this newsletter? Why is my click-through rate so bad? So that kind of stuff.
And we were talking a little bit before this session, and back to my question about the title of this session being solely conversion. Why does the New York Times do is it just strictly to run for subscribers, or what are some of the reasons you run your newsletter program?
A couple of reasons. Readers like them. Yes, people hate email, but they love email newsletters. It's free New York Times journalism in your inbox. Our journalists like it, again, because of this intimacy. Not only do readers feel like Andrew Ross Sorkin is writing to them, Andrew Ross Sorkin can get email responses. We have seen a correlation between newsletter readership engagement with subscriptions, so we're diving into that. And we just want to be as innovative on this platform as we are on other platforms as well.
The Lenfest Institute, so for those of you who don't know, the Philadelphia Inquirer is a for-profit arm of a not-for-profit. So there's the Lenfest Institute in the United States, whose goal is to work towards making sure that local journalism is sustainable. And recently they held an unconference around newsletters. And one of the conversations that really got a bunch of people in the room going was, questions one should ask themselves before starting a newsletter. And you started to talk a bit about this, but can you each walk me through your criteria specifically, and how you go about ideating and developing the editorial process and the criteria for success? So if someone in this room, I like these things, I want to make sure people kind of take away something. Yep. If they were to walk back tomorrow and try to get a start, what would you lay out for them? How do you go about that?
Well, I've been more launching the automated ones that we've just got content sitting there, and we might as well blast it out in a newsletter. So I've been focusing a little bit more on that. The editorial team, the audience team, launched it's a newsletter called Amplify, and it's written by women, written by different women from the globe. It's every week. It's a new writer, and they just write about important things to women. And I know that one spent a lot of time. We have a UX lab, and they spent a lot of time in there baking that newsletter. I mean, just figuring out what to call it. I know was a big exercise, and they brought in people, and then they tested it.
So they came up with an idea, and then they wanted to test that idea before they launched it.
Yeah. So they brought in people to read it and test it, and it went through. I'm not sure if somebody's. It took 2 or 3 months, I think, for them to really nail down, and it's been really successful. It's even 3 or 4 months later, it's still, even though the subscription rate has really grown, the open rate is really stayed very, very high.
And so now that you've got the successful process, like how do you bring in all the other partners? So you've talked a bit about working with the lab and like the testing, but where does marketing fit in? Where does sales fit in? Do they fit in?
They all fit in. They all have a role to play, and that's where I guess I go visit people in the company, and sometimes it's begging and pleading. Sometimes it's they're excited about it and they really want to help out. But it's I kind of think of it was going to be a 2-year mission to really get them off the ground, and there's 4 or 5 pillars. There's the editorial content, there's the design, and I think we've been really nailed those down. We're relaunching an email platform. We were using an in-house one for a couple of decades. Mm-hmm. So we're just testing the new platform, and that's been a lot of work. And then there's the analytics. Once the new platform launches, then it has the API that connects into all the customer data that, from the rest of our platforms. And then there's the marketing as well, both on-site and off-site, and that we're just beginning to figure that piece out.
What about you guys? Like, what is your process from like the ideation through to action?
Well, first off, you really want to figure out what kind. Is it a guide? Is it subject-based? Will there be a guide or a host? And then from there you want to talk about, for example, we've launched a Gender Letter, which is another kind of women issue newsletter. Amplify is a great name, by the way. And this right now is really about...
Shannon, it's Shannon's. Was that your idea? Sorry, I didn't see you there tonight.
I was on the launch team, but Amplify actually came from one of our focus groups. Or it might have come from Hannah Sung, who I think might be here as well.
Amazing.
It's a great name, yeah.
Honestly, it was not our original name. It came about from a lot of conversations within the building and with readers. I think we were originally going to call it Uplift,
Okay.
but Amplify won.
We do a lot of kind of throwing out names, and you'd be surprised, like 50, 75 of the worst names I'm never going to repeat, for our fashion blog, or for Gender Letter, or for Game of Thrones is pretty easy. But yeah, trying to get the right name so people are really excited when it lands in your inbox, and even more so to open it. Those are really key things that an editorial person never would consider before, Okay, so where was I? Okay, so really what kind of newsletter is this? Is it going to come from the New York Times, or is it coming from Max Fisher and Amanda Taub, or is it coming from Jessica Bennett? So looking at that, and then making sure that the style and the format kind of applies as well to whether or not this is a guide-based or a host-based or subject-based. And then you spend a lot of time and a lot of healthy, lively conversations about what it's going to look like. Is it going to be an intro from Jessica at the top, or are we going to jump right into numbers? And then trying to make sure that we continue to refine it, listening to what our audience is saying. Deal Book, we revamped this business newsletter. It was spearheaded by Andrew Ross Sorkin, who's one of the more preeminent business journalists in the United States. The readers really didn't like this blue hyperlink, and boy, they just let us know. So we changed it. But we're really proud of that revamp that happened in November. So everyone should sign up for those, and then the other 54 New York Times newsletters.
Can I ask? So I just saw Shelby there too. She looks after Amplify now, so maybe we could ask her what she's learned from not just launching it, but having to maintain it and keep it going, because it's a lot of work.
Sure.
Yeah, so the focus groups that we ended up doing, we did a couple. And we also did an online survey to kind of figure out what the name was, and the name went through quite a few testing, and Hannah Sung, thank you for giving us Amplify, because that ended up being almost unanimously the one that the audience really wanted. And then from there, we really looked at, okay, well, how do we set up the structure? What do we want out of it? And we did a couple different tests and a couple different stress tests when we first sent it out. And even now, it's still evolving. Like, we just changed the structure again 2 or 3 weeks ago into what we wanted to do, and just taking things out, putting things in, and seeing what our audience reacted to the best.
Thank you. So now you get a product going, and this is sort of where I'm at right now. So I'm asking this question for me. How do you get the momentum and the excitement with whether it's like the sales and the marketing departments? How do you get them on board to like really make sure that there's the promotion that you need, that whether or not it's sponsored or traffic based? Like, how do you?
Again, I'd say even 3 years ago, there wouldn't have been such a close collaboration with all of our business colleagues, not just product, but we're launching a pop-up Summer in the City newsletter. Sign up, please. And working with advertising, even though we're subscription-based, it just makes sense to let them know as soon as possible that we're launching this, and here's our editorial strategy. It's just going to win for everybody. That's what I feel like. But getting back to I can't stress enough that newsletters are really a place that just beg for experimentation. So refining your newsletters. You get what people are going to write in really, really mad. Well, you've already demonstrated that they open it. It's a habitual product for them. So go experiment. I can't stress that enough. We're very lucky we can do that with this type of medium for journalism.
How do you guys track your progress, right? So how are you tracking, whether it's signups, open rates, conversion to subscription? Like, what does that, how do you do it? What does that workflow look like, if there is a workflow? Like, is it formal? Is it kind of like guerrilla style? What are you using to track it? How are you also, more importantly, how are you communicating that through the organization so people are appreciating your work?
Sure. Well, we have a Slack channel, and I try to, I don't get it every day, but I try to send some sort of small nugget out to the group, and it's actually worked really well. There's probably 80 people on that Slack channel from Editorial and around the company that are somehow interested in newsletters, and I'm sure they're not reading it every day, but it's active enough that I feel like it seeds ideas out there. In terms of the data, as I said, when we get our new email platform, it has the API and it connects into the rest of our customer data, so everything will change then. And I know they're going to connect Tableau with our directly into our database, and my world is going to get a lot easier.
What does your world look like now? Like, if I'm out there and I don't have a big fancy, I'm not at the Globe and Mail, I'm not getting a big fancy platform, like, how did you, because I love this. We talked about this a bit yesterday. How do you go about it?
Well, with the business group, you've got to have data metrics. You've got to be able to prove with data that what you're doing is working. Mm-hmm. Last week, my life got way easier because we finally got the data that said that our subscribers are significantly more likely to retain if they have a newsletter. So not just the digital subscribers, but our print subscribers who've also signed, they get digital for free. Mm-hmm. If the print subscribers have a newsletter, they're even more significantly likely to retain.
How did you figure that out?
So that was just month to month, tracking the newsletter users versus the non-newsletter users, and we finally pulled that data out. But probably 6 or 7 months ago, I realized that I couldn't wait for the new platform and everything to connect. That was going to be more than a year down the road. So I got a guy to dump a big Excel spreadsheet on me every month, and I would spend a day or two with this Excel spreadsheet trying to figure out the data and the metrics that needed to prove that this was working. And Excel kept choking on me and dying, and it was because Excel dies when you have more than 1 million rows of data. So my brother, who's had the same issue at a different industry, he said, "You've got to get onto Power BI." And so we have these late night phone calls because he works in the mining industry, and they're going through the same sorts of issues where the guys in the Excel spreadsheets, it's just not working. So he got me into Power BI, and for $10 a month, your platform can run millions and millions. So I taught myself Power BI, and it's been amazing. And I can't wait to get on to Tableau because just the amount of data and analytics and the display that you can use with these platforms, just it's amazing.
So roll up your sleeves, guys.
So for the data science people, they're going, oh, what a dumb old journalist. But it's probably been the favorite thing I've done in the last year is teach myself a little bit of DAX and code.
What about the first time I've ever heard the journalism industry like compared to the mining industry? You get entertainment a lot, you get cars, but so in terms of communication, we have a Slack channel. I send out emails to our newsletter editors. I have a listserv for that. We put stuff on our internal corporate communications site. I hold quarterly newsletter editor brown bags so we can talk about what other people are doing.
That's a good idea.
That's great.
Yeah.
And we've got so many newsletter editors. It's just nice to get them all in one place.
Well, let's do that. Melissa? No.
Where was I going with this? Oh, and so you gotta show the wins and that's why I talk about Game of Thrones, or I talk about what's happening with Good News, and also demonstrate that we can experiment. We're sending out notifications for this new podcast Caliphate that Rukmini has been doing. And originally it had started just as a notification to let subscribers know when a new episode in the series had dropped. But now she's actually offering a lot of invaluable journalism in those emails. And so we're seeing, we saw more than 20,000 people have signed up for that thing. So it was pretty strong. And that's just a limited run as well. But in terms of our technology, we're doing the same thing. We're upgrading from a very, very old ESP to a brand new one, and then makes communication with the newsletter team even more important to let them know what kind of features are rolling over and what to expect in the next couple of weeks. So.
Let's talk murder. One of my favorite things, I was talking to the Seattle Times about newsletters, and they're quite successful too, and we were talking about, I'd inherited this big program, it was all over the board, I'm like, I don't know what to do here, and they kind of gave me some guidelines to figure out what to continue, what to develop, and what to kill. And they happen to have funerals for their products that are not successful, which I love. How do you guys go about making those difficult decisions, right? Because it's really easy to start something new. I think the hard part is what not to do.
So first off, we call it sunsetting, not murder. We're New York.
I'm from Philly.
And this gets back to, there was no strategy whatsoever, and for years and years at the Times, if a desk wanted a newsletter, they got one. And you think about how the Times was structured at the point. They had organized the entire newsroom to put out a print product, as opposed to looking at what the audience is. So you have desks that have these newsletters going to, and not even considering kind of the audience. So recently, we have race-related, we have gender, which cross over our desks, and trying to figure out how to cull those kind of desk-based newsletters that don't make any sense is what we call sunsetting. And part of my editorial strategy for 2018 is bucketing these different newsletters and figuring out, okay, should we upgrade these? Should we refine these? And should we sunset these? We have such a spectrum of pretty disappointing newsletters to just phenomenal products, and making sure we elevate these guys up to this point or shoving them away is a big part of my job. But in terms of the practical aspect of things, we first want to figure out if we can roll that audience over. Again, we don't. You got the whole spam compliance issues. But can we roll that audience over in such a way so we don't lose them? If we can't, then we let them know in a very polite way why we're sunsetting these newsletters. And then we give them offerings about, hey, here's something else that you might like, here's something else. We got rid of Interpreter, or wait, no, sorry, not that, that's one of our best ones. We got rid of Entrepreneurship, which was a newsletter that was hung over from a vertical that we had shut down like 5 years ago. And the editor went to a different news organization. I was like, please God, can we shut this thing down? Because no one was engaging, no one was caring about it. And so what we did was we gave them 4 or 5 options when we shut it down, saying you could sign up for DealBook, you could sign up for Your Money, the morning briefing, and then just shut it down and rolled it down.
What about the Globe? Do you guys?
We haven't killed any yet. We almost
Murder, kill,
yeah. We only have 20, so the sign-up page isn't sort of too crowded yet. I'd love to launch about 10 more in the next year or something, and figure one out. But there's one that is being curated now, and it's not growing much. It all depends on what the job the newsletter is supposed to do, and I believe each newsletter has got its own little job. And this one, the advertising people like it. You know what? That's great. The cost of sending out a newsletter, like the platform we're going to, is something like $1,000 for 1 million emails in a month. So if you think about if I can convert one person from that newsletter, and let's say that their customer lifetime value is $500 or $1,000, it's paid for it right there. So if the editorial department really doesn't want to curate the newsletter anymore, I would just try automating it for a while and see if people stick with it. And if the advertising people still are interested in it, then I don't see a reason to shoot it yet.
So I'm going to open it up to the audience wow, yay. That's always that awkward moment where silence for questions. I guess I'll start. I saw you first. Oh, yeah.
My name's Allison Smith. I publish two political newsletters that are subscription-based, so we charge our readers, and they're quite niche. And I've been doing this, one of them, for over 6 years, and I wonder about newsletter fatigue. When I started 6 years ago, I was the only newsletter that I think a lot of people were receiving, but now, I know just from my own reading habits, what you guys are talking about, you said 54 at the New York Times. Is there a concern that we're going to get to a point where we're getting too many newsletters, people are ignoring them? Killing them you were just talking about, but is that something you guys think about?
Yes. And the way I think about it is those ingredients for a good, successful newsletter, you have to hit those. So, for example, I'm interested in outdoorsy things at national parks in the United States, and I'm going to open that, which is a completely different audience than the foreign policy interpreter newsletter that I open. So if you think about who the audience is, and then you could also figure out how are you going to make your product different than all the other things. Mm-hmm. Are you going to have a political newsletter that just gives the headlines and bullet points? A lot of people are doing that. So how can you offer context and valuable information that will say, oh my gosh, this is something I can't live without? Morning briefing, we're very lucky in the regard that people are now kind of considering it like their daily newspaper. So if Billy has not dropped it off at their front door by 6:20, then they're calling Billy's parents and saying, where's my paper? So we get that. We get emails from people saying, my morning briefing, it came 25 minutes late, and so my commute was ruined. So how do we become invaluable? How can we offer? How can you make your product so invaluable? And that's hard. It's really hard.
I know I've been really tracking our newsletters per user because it's been ticking up almost monthly. And I figure we're getting close to an exhaustion rate where the people who convert to paid usually have more newsletters than people who are not converting. But I think it's going to peak out around 3 to 4. And some are weekly, some are daily. But the Boston Globe, the guy said once you get to 4, people aren't opening them anymore. They're just don't have time. Different than when you have only 2 newsletters, though.
Yeah.
This lady over here.
Hey there. I'm Lauren from NPR. I'm wondering about how you talk with when you have outside the standard editorial practice, identified a particularly ripe opportunity that is in the newsroom where a newsletter would be a great fit, but they don't have one. How do you talk about the value or the trade-off, the relative value, for instance, of taking that editorial staffer, having them work on a newsletter for 4 hours a week instead of doing whatever might produce, 2 stories or that same thing? It's all about everybody's balancing the trade-off. So how do you talk about those, relative value of different types of investment?
You want me to take that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So are you saying it would come from advertising or it would come from masthead person? It's very different if a masthead editor walks over and says, I think I want X, Y, and Z.
In our world, it's much more in the podcast space.
Okay.
Great podcast audience, super invested, totally anonymous because it's podcasting. Has all the great ingredients, great voice,
Right.
defined editorial strategy and value. Here's a channel where if you were to expand to it, we could really draw some
You're
lines.
doing great. You don't need my advice. You already know how to do this.
Internal sales you're getting at?
It is very hard, and then you kind of just explain to them, everyone's busy, but you can have this really intimate relationship with your readers. We have this with Sam Sifton. I mean, he writes our cooking newsletter. People love to hear from Sam Sifton, and he could be doing many, many different things, but he realizes how powerful the newsletter is for our cooking brand, and he enjoys writing it, again, because of this relationship that's so close to the readers.
I think for us, I wouldn't mind jumping on that too. I faced that, right? We recently launched a Phillies newsletter, and we knew that there was a big potential audience for that because we had like a kind of crappy automated version that did well. And I'm like, if this is doing well, then imagine if we actually loved it. And the sports team were very reticent. They were talking about all the other things they could be doing. And I think part of the internal sell is to be like, okay, well, let's talk about the workflow collectively. Let's, before we make a decision, how can we make this a lightly curated newsletter? How can we really be respectful of this person's time who has a million different things to do? And just working with them to the point, because some people will just say no right away, right? Because they've got everything coming at them. And I think it's a bit of a collaborative sell for a while. And now it's great. Like they love it. They're so happy they're doing it, right? It was their idea all along. So I think it's just the workflow piece is something that I think I would address.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that.
It's all about staff.
Yeah. Over here, yeah.
Hi, I'm Megan. Thanks. Hi, I'm Mega. I work at STAT. We focus on health and medicine. So you have newsletters as a way to bring people into the funnel, turn them into subscribers. How do you guys feel about newsletters as an independent revenue source? Kind of similar to, I guess, what you're doing. You just sort of charge for it as individual content.
Yeah, we've been talking about that for a while. All of our newsletters are now free, but is there an opportunity down the road to get some revenue from there?
Yeah, I don't know if we've been talking about it as a standalone products and also premium newsletters, but we've just been talking about it so far.
Do you think it might detract from the funnel? Or I guess that would be the next question is how do you sort of figure out where it fits into the funnel, if it does at all, or?
It's a good question. We're figuring that out.
Tune in next year.
Yeah, pretty much. But there's a couple of our competitors that do it. I believe Political Pro, Washington Post, I think, is launching. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think, each newsletter kind of has a job to do in the funnel. Some of them are really good at acquisition. Some of them are really good at advertising, even if it's not a big list. Your advertising team just wants to put the newsletter in the package of things that they sell. Others are really good at driving registrations. Like when I compare our lifestyle newsletter to our business newsletter, the lifestyle one drives registrations and the business newsletter drives conversions. And then at the bottom of the funnel, you could have other newsletters that are there to be premium and retention.
That's a really good visual. That's a really good visual.
We're having early conversations about it as well. And there's a real opportunity. I hear from readers constantly about the fact that they wished they didn't have to pay for a full subscription, right? Like I'm a sports person. I've moved from Philly to Colorado. I love the Eagles. Like why can't I just get that content? And I think that there is an opportunity to create products for specific audiences. You just have to be really certain and know that audience right away. And yeah, there's a cannibalization risk for sure. And we haven't at all worked that out. We're really thinking about politics and the opportunities at a local level. But I'd say, you have to be really certain about the job to be done. You have to be really certain about the audience and before you go down that road, I think. Over there.
Hey, good morning. I'm Robert Rivard. I publish a nonprofit media site in San Antonio, Texas. I wonder if you've experimented at all with frequency of newsletters. We're all news junkies, so everything seems to go out very early in the morning, even though we all have inbox fatigue. Have you tried sending newsletters out at different times of the day or tinkering with the frequency? And do you have a standard length at the Globe and Mail or New York Times for newsletters, and also some sort of protocol for how much advertising they could carry?
Sure. So we do tinker with timing and days and frequency. For example, we were sending out our healthcare newsletter out twice a week, and we've just shut that down to one. Reader feedback has been fantastic. Do we want twice a week, which we did with the Interpreter? We did that from going from once a week. Again, this is the foreign policy blog, foreign policy newsletter. We do that to twice a week, and so far it's been great. Again, getting back, you should just experiment and see what readers want. In terms of timing, there are slews of newsletters that go out in the morning. Brian Selter, he sends his out at 11 o'clock. Someone told me he always sends it out. He always gets Brian's newsletter right before he goes to bed. So it's never the exact right time. But A/B testing is your friend here, figuring out what you should do and when and what days. A lot of things we had was like a holdover. Our fashion newsletter was going out on Fridays simply because the T magazine content that had been taking up a lot of it would be published in the paper on Thursday night. And just stuff like that, just like you have to step back and say, okay, let's talk to our readers, let's figure out from what the data says that is most successful for these.
Yeah, when I started a year and some ago, all of them were going out at 6 or 7 in the morning on a weekday. So with the audience team, we looked at when are people reading that same content, because we don't have the A/B testing yet. And we just started to time the newsletters. The Saturday morning newsletters have done better than some days, the weekday ones. And we're getting into some Sundays, and we changed up a lot of evening ones. We haven't really tried the late night one yet, but it seems like they work at almost all times of the day. The content matters more than the time of day. And then frequency is a really interesting question, though, because like we had an investing newsletter, and it was really long, and they were doing it twice a week. And I said, well, we could spend 2 or 3 years trying to double your list size and and that's a lot of work, or we could just start sending it out 3 times a week and trim it back a bit, because it's not like they're creating more content for it. They're just really compiling all the things they're doing into one package. And suddenly you've doubled your open rate over a week if you're sending it out 3 times instead of twice.
Over there.
Hi, I'm Andrea with the Pew Research Center, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about list hygiene. Do you all take a look at who is engaging with your newsletters? Do you do re-engagement campaigns? Do you unsubscribe people if they're kind of dead weight?
Great question.
And also the term list hygiene is so fun, right? And I never knew that, and like deliverability and all these terms, I had no clue. And list hygiene is so sexy. Yes, we do. We are very, very, very excited about our active users. And for folks who are a little newsletter 101, you can split your pot of subscribers into active and inactive users. What we do is we look at folks who have opened our newsletters at least once over the past 90 days. And if you haven't, you're inactive. Why you want to split this audience apart is that you can really get an accurate sense of the readers who care and who are very passionate by looking at your active as opposed to your inactive, like your open rates and your click-through rates. So we recently did a whole cleanse. And guess what? Our active users are really into our newsletter, so it's really exciting to see that. We're seeing open rates just go sky high. And what we're planning on doing, again, I think I had mentioned we were moving over to a new ESP, is we're going to start a very aggressive re-engagement campaign. With our old program, it was very laborious. It had to be HTML hard-coded and just very long how we had to segment the audience. And now it's going to be a much, much smoother process as soon as we can kind of get that on our developers' roadmap.
The other thing about when you purge your lists, and I'm not a technology person, so my understanding of this is fairly limited, but unlike websites, you can't really tell what people are doing in their inbox. They're mostly private. I mean, Google knows what you're doing in Gmail, but you don't really know what's happening in people's inboxes. So there's a bit of technology guesswork that happens with that. There's like a beacon that they put in the HTML that basically tells your server that you delivered content into that inbox. The way they do a lot of the platforms is that beacon says, I delivered an image, and a pixel of an image was delivered to that inbox. Well, if people have their images off, which is fairly common, then that person shows as never opening that email. So there's a bit of guesswork in terms of figuring out if somebody's actually opened that email. You can add click-through rates to that, and that you get a lot more confidence because you've delivered, somebody's come to your site and clicked through. So the one thing you should do when you purge your lists is send out an email saying, we're about to kick you out of this list, but if you don't want to go, please, log in or tell us that you still want your
I call it the
newsletter.
guilt email, the grandmother guilt email. Do you still love us? You never call us, like whatever. And we sent one out, and we got everybody back in. So I think it's really.
Your open rate is still a bit of tech guesswork. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. We are out of time. I'm being told by this giant clock in front of me. So, if you've got further questions, feel free to reach out to folks.
Feel free to come up.
Yeah, we're heading out to the break. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.